gentlemen, welcome to Retro Warriors, episode 322. Woo. As always, I'm your host, Justin Baker, and as always, I'm joined by resident old bastard, Chris Saturn.
Hello.
Saturn, we don't have any housekeeping.
Oh, no.
Nothing at all.
We've got a website. We got a Patreon. We got... So you should go listen to Cinema Rogues. There you go.
I feel like you're undermining me. I just said there's none.
Well, I corrected
invent a
you.
bunch of...
That's right.
We do have a website, retrowarriors.net. We also have a Patreon. We'd appreciate it if you would consider supporting us. My week,
Yes, sir.
I've discovered that when I am at the computer all day, and when I'm streaming twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays at twitch.tv/retro_warriors.
That could have also been in the housekeeping.
Well, it's not. It's in this segment. Okay. I have time to get all of my show stuff done during the workday.
Yeah.
And in the evenings, I'm not panicking because I haven't played enough video games for the show or written notes or done whatever.
Right.
Because there's time now. And so in the evenings, I'm just sitting here like, what do I do? And then I was like, well, Justin, now you can enjoy your life. And then I'm like, well, how do I do that? And so most nights, I just rewatch the same television shows I've seen 100 times and eat peanut butter.
Right, yeah. Like
It's mostly Law and Order and peanut butter, and then just me being like, I guess I'll go to bed at 9:30. I don't know. And finally, I was like, no, I can play video. There's time for me to play these video games in the evening that I always have. And without fail, I'll go, all right, well, I guess I got to boot up the game I'm playing for this week. And then I'm like, no, wait, stop. I can play something else.
Yeah.
So I got my 3DS out, and I've tried to pick Dragon Quest VII back up out of all games.
That can be a difficult game to pick up out of nowhere. It is very episodic. So maybe if you were at the start of an episode, it would have been okay.
I wasn't. I'm 36 hours into the game.
Yeah.
And I just got the magic carpet.
Okay, yeah.
And I immediately, I was like, all right, it's telling me where to go in the game. Like, I talked to NPCs, I figured it out. And then I was like, all right, well, I got the map. I'll pull the map up and see where the place I need to go is.
Yeah.
They made this game in the 90s, and then they remade it in the 2010s.
Correct.
And nowhere in the game can you view a map with the names of the towns on it.
Well, did you try just casting zoom to go to that town?
I learned that a lot later, but it doesn't always work because not all of the locations I need to be at are listed on Zoom.
Oh, yeah. Most of them are.
Most, the big towns and stuff, yeah, but some of the weirder locations are just like little, it's like, oh, go to this weird little just little one-off houses and places. Yeah. And it's like, go to this place again, and I'm like, well, I haven't played the game for 2 years, so I don't remember where it is. I'll just go look up a map. Yeah. So I go Google Dragon Quest VII map.
It's a
pull the
PS1
map up. And I go, this isn't the names of the places.
Yeah.
And then I go, Dragon Quest VII 3DS map. And it's the PS1 map.
Yeah.
And I can't find a 3DS map anywhere on the internet. And I'm like, how? This is such a basic function.
I found one.
You did eventually. Saturn had to track one down for me on DeviantArt.
Yeah, that's where the maps go.
That someone had manually edited over the PS1 map with a weird filter and then wrote in the correct 3DS names.
Yeah.
What a pain in the ass.
Yeah, that was so the early Dragon Quest games had very different localizations to the current Dragon Quest games, and the PS1 game Dragon Quest VII was particularly hard off because they tried to fit everything in the game into 8 letters.
Oh no!
And so a lot of town and character and enemy names were very abridged.
Yeah,
and because there was 20 years of online information of that game, and then there was no proper strategy guide released for the 3DS re-release, you find a lot of information that still has those old abridged names.
Now, when I was playing the game, it wasn't an issue because I usually remembered generally where stuff was.
Yeah.
But coming from any modern video games, it's hard.
Yeah. That's fair.
I've also been trying to do microcomputer stuff.
Yeah.
I've been watching a lot of LGR and 8-Bit Guy on YouTube and kind of like getting jazzed about microcomputers and then fiddling with emulating them and realizing how much of a pain in the ass it is.
Yeah.
And how much of it relies on you having an intimate knowledge with these microcomputers in the first place, such that if you're emulating them and you've never used them, you don't fucking know what kind of boot disks or ROMs or kickstart ROMs you need.
Or even what commands to use to load a program.
Yeah, and so it's been tremendously frustrating.
Yeah, I can get that.
I've been I did a whole stream on Twitch where I failed to make a RetroPie with working microcomputers. I got a couple games to like boot.
Yeah, that's good.
But it ain't doing.
So what all microcomputers were you trying?
Apple II, ZX Spectrum, Commodore 64, Amiga, and something else that I've forgotten already.
Yeah, I've got C64 and MSX working on my Pi.
Oh, MSX 1 and 2 were the other ones.
Yeah, I've got C64 and MSX working. I tried Amiga and failed miserably. And so I'm putting that off until the micro console comes out, and I'm just going to hope that works better.
Oh, and then I was like, well, I know DOS. I love DOS. I'll just turn my Raspberry Pi into just a DOS machine.
Mm-hmm.
Also, not working. Does not work. It's just bad. So I think what I'm going to end up needing to do is just installing a regular desktop environment and then DOSBox X.
Yeah.
And then auto booting into DOSBox X.
Yeah.
Or the problem is,
or you could just emulate it on your PC.
Shut up, Saturn. Gall. That's not complicated or weird at all.
Oh, right. My bad.
It all emulates on my PC fine.
Yeah, I know.
That's not the point. I wanted to have a little computer that did it so that I could put it in a drawer and never use it.
Yeah, that's why I'm waiting for the A400 Mini, or is it the A800?
It's a 500. It's A500 Mini. For the Amiga, the A500 was the most compatible model. And from what I understand, a lot of people that owned Amiga 1200s actually struggled to run earlier software titles because it had some kind of like AGA card or something.
I think I'm thinking of the Atari computers that were 400 and 800.
Atari ST was another one I tried.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, just been struggling with that. It's a pain in the ass. And so much of it is like, well, you know how you got to have this special boot ROM. And I'm like, no, I don't know that. I didn't have an Atari ST or whatever.
Right.
I just wanted to play the games.
Yeah.
It's tough whenever you're basically dealing. I feel like it's a lot of how like people that like come into like retro gaming and they're like, I just want to play small video games. And they're like, all right, well, first you got to learn all this terminology.
Right.
You know,
did you install a BIOS for your Sega CD emulator?
Yeah, I feel their upsettedness.
Right.
Yeah, but that's it. That's about all I've been up to is fussing with that and trying to fucking wrap my head around Dragon Quest VII again.
But did you configure a virtual memory card in slot 2?
What's also weird is I played Dragon Quest VII for like an hour and a half and got in exactly 0 random battles.
That sounds like Dragon Quest VII to me. Yeah.
And in my head, I was like, man, I remember this game having more random battles. But then I was like, I guess it's just in dungeons.
Yeah. In the 3DS version on the overworld, you see the battles beforehand. You don't.
I did not see. I mean, I ran around for a long time and saw literally 0 battles.
Yeah, you must have been in some areas that were peaceful.
I guess it's very disorienting because I was excited. I was like, oh, I remember this like a job system game.
Yeah.
Because I was looking for like a job system RPG, and then I get in it and I was like, where's the things to fight?
Yeah, they're in specific areas. No, I am since they finally gave us a date for the Final Fantasy 4 Pixel remaster. I was trying not to start anything too meaty between now and then. So naturally, of course, like I said last time, I started Final Fantasy 12. But I was looking for something that was less substantive. I was looking for something a little more lighthearted, a little more
ball in a cup.
Some ball in a cup. I want something between ball in a cup and 60-hour GRPG.
Pong.
Yeah. So I was looking for something more simplistic that I already had installed on something, and then I remembered that a few months ago I bought Doki Doki Literature Club Plus.
Yes.
And so I decided I would finally sit down and play it because I'd played the original and I was like, I don't want to talk about that on the show because one, it's a visual novel and I historically hate those. And two, I talked about the original on the show when I played it. So I tried to look up when I played it, and that was in 2017. So that was 4 years ago, and I'm sure I did talk about it on the show, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I like meta horror, and it is that. But I've not gotten to that point yet, so I'm still just in the cutesy harem visual novel part, and I'm just like, I hate everything. I hate everyone and everything. Just get me past this. And then like I got right up to the point where it's about to turn into the good part, and I was like, and I saved it and I turned it off, and when I restarted it, I noticed the game starts in this adorable little OS environment, which is how it's going to do the metafiction on an Xbox instead of actually using your operating system on your PC, because it's not on a PC. And I was like, oh, that's adorable. And then I start playing through it, and it's got like this photo gallery, and it's like, this is what you get for doing this action during Act 1. And I was like, oh no, I need to do all the other actions in Act 1 before Act 2 starts. So I started the game over and did all those alternate actions. And then I was like, but there's a third choice for everything. So then I started the game over.
So you still have not gotten to play to the
No,
good
I've not
part.
gotten to the good part, and it's driving me insane because I just keep playing this terrible harem-based visual novel.
It is not driving you insane.
Right.
You are already insane, and
Correct.
you are allowing yourself to wallow in said insanity. The game took you right up to where you wanted to be, and you're like, no.
But it gave me the options to see that if I keep wallowing around in the dumb part, that it will reward me with the picture of a thing I don't care about. And I'm like, I need to do that.
Oh, boy.
So I have.
If you just need some JPEGs, I'll send you some. I mean, I'm just saying.
Yeah, that's. I have a bad habit of that. Anytime I get to a game where it's like, here's a menu of the things you can unlock. They're all very easy to unlock, but very time consuming. I'm like, well, I can consume time.
I have time to spare.
I know how to do that.
There was time now.
Yeah, so I fell into that trap again on the game that I was trying to just rush through. I did the opposite of that.
Great.
So, yeah.
Well, let's do some news.
Yes, sir.
First up, someone recreated Google's 2012 April Fool's joke by porting Google Maps to the NES.
Yes. Did you look at this?
No.
So the guy did it. He was able to create an interface device that went between the internet and his NES. I think it's using the controller port or something to get a signal. Anyway,
right.
Maybe it's using some serial connection that used to connect to the FDS. I don't know. I didn't look into the specifics, but I did look at what it looks like when he's playing it, and sure enough, it's got the fake Dragon Quest interface, just like Google's April Fool's joke did.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as detailed as theirs was, because theirs made it look like a perfect Dragon Quest map with widescreen graphics and all this ridiculous stuff. No, this is trying desperately for an NES to connect to the internet. So it's like square by square trying to decipher, should this part of Paris be grass or mountain or whatever. And so it's janky. But
it's functional.
Yeah, it is kind of very slow and technically creates a map of the world, and it is neat. Yeah. So, props to that dude.
After a long YouTube deep dive was posted, several news sites have now agreed with us that the recent ludicrous auctions were probably money laundering.
Gasp.
I don't know why anyone is shocked at any of this anymore.
Yeah.
It was, I mean,
it was very obvious.
The first one, like the Zelda cartridge selling for a lot or whatever it was, kind of got us. By the time we got to the Mario 64, it was like, all right, this is an ad. They're advertising their service and moving money around.
Right.
Like,
and by that point, even by the time the Super Mario Brothers one had sold, there was already news reports that were, the winning buyer looks like they might be associated with the grading company and the auction house.
Yeah.
So, it's been pretty clear for a while now.
But I'm glad that we're all on the same page now.
Yeah, I'm glad that the rest of the internet has caught up. So, good job, everyone. Welcome to the club.
Anti-RPG Moon is releasing on PC in English. This recently released on Switch.
Yes. And now it's coming to PC, and I'm excited about that. I am all for it getting an even wider release.
Yeah. Konami and GOG have updated Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2, Silent Hill 4, and the NES Castlevania / Contra collections to support modern controllers. Thanks, Konami.
I'm glad they caught up eventually.
I like to imagine they just got modern controllers, and they're like, oh my God, well, our games should support these. Do people know about these? And they sent out the update, and they were like, they already knew.
Yeah, they released them on GOG, and they were like, it works fine with this Gravis gamepad. I don't know what everybody's problem is. I tried it on a Microsoft Sidewinder. It's fine.
I was looking at all the Gravis gamepad, like the later ones, like the Gravis Destroyer,
God.
And it's just the same fucking thing, but like with handles.
Yeah.
Game Boy Productivity Suite meets funding goals on Kickstarter.
Yeah, it's there was a leak a little while back about a either unreleased or barely released Game Boy add-on that was basically just a little productivity suite, and now somebody has made their own as kind of a homebrew, and it has a calculator and a calendar.
Now, I take issue with this. Hold on. You can't see it, but I'm holding it.
Okay.
The Game Boy has a productivity suite.
Is it called Mary Kate and Ashley whatever it was?
Pocket Planner? Yes. Mary Kate and Ashley Pocket Planner. I have that game. It's in my hand right now. I keep it on my shelf behind me.
So this is black and white Game Boy. That's Game Boy Color.
Right, but still, it's the Game Boy. This one runs on black and white Game Boy.
True. That was a hybrid
it's the black
cart,
cartridge.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm just saying, it's got stiff competition with the Mary Kate and Ashley Pocket Planner because that's where I keep all of my show-related goings on.
That's good. I'm glad that you keep notes there.
So just saying. Toshihiro Nagoshi may be leaving Sega to join NetEase. This is longtime Monkey Ball and Yakuza series creator and kind of jack of all trades currently at Sega.
Yeah, he's been running a lot of the show lately. And granted, as of now, it seems there is only one source that this is coming from, and that source has been questionable in the past. But it does seem to be in the wake of several other medium to high profile Japanese developers leaving to join some bigger Chinese development companies. So we'll see where this goes.
Yeah, that'd be a pretty major blow to Sega.
Yeah, it could be really bad news for Sega.
NetEase is the company, I believe, that is doing the mobile Diablo game that Blizzard made fun of us for not liking.
Right, that's correct.
On stage a few years ago, for anyone wondering.
Right.
Several sites are reporting on rumors of Game Boy / Game Boy Color coming to Nintendo Switch Online, and Eurogamer is reporting it as verified fact.
Yeah.
And Eurogamer is one of the few outlets that I do trust to not just fling shit around randomly. They said they independently corroborated the claims, so it's
as of now, it hasn't been confirmed by Nintendo yet, though.
Correct.
And also, no one has speculated on any kind of specific release date.
Right. Did we not find Game Boy emulators in the data mine that was performed in like 2019?
Yes. So
it's one of those things where it's like we've kind of known something's coming.
We always knew that it was possible and that they were at least working on it. But this is giving a little more credence to that. But until Nintendo confirms it, which by the time this episode goes live, they could have. We don't know.
Right.
But until then, I don't want to say definitively.
Yeah. Peggy revises rules to give any game an instant 18+ rating if the game features any in-game gambling, does not apply to loot boxes or real-world gambling.
Yeah, and they have since clarified to also say that if a game is being re-released with no changes and it was already rated something other than 18, it gets to keep its previous rating.
Which just undermines the entire spirit of this ridiculous rating in the first place.
So basically they're saying that if Nintendo wants to re-release Pokemon again, they're not going to force an 18+ rating on it. But any other game, sorry.
And gambling is such a broad term, especially when we're not talking about microtransactions and loot boxes, which are actual gambling.
Right. Well, they did
not microtransactions, loot boxes specifically.
They did specify that it's things like table games, card games, roulette,
slot
slots.
machines.
And they also specified anything that glamorizes or instructs the use of. So your game can have a casino in it, or it can have people playing poker. But if you actually play out the casino, then it's 18 plus. But if it's just a plot point that it addresses and moves on, then that is not automatically 18 plus.
I can't think of a more boneheaded way for Peggy to finally address the real world gambling situation in video games than by completely ignoring it and damaging all video games.
Yeah. So what I'm concerned about is I feel like this would mean that any re-release of Dragon Quest 4 through 11 would instantly be 18 plus at this point. Because Square Enix doesn't tend to just release Virtual Console anymore. They only do upgraded re-releases.
Right. And if they're upgrading it, then according to Peggy standards, it's 18 plus if it has a casino. And most Dragon Quest games do have a casino.
Right. And I don't expect that the Dragon Quest team would go about and edit the game, especially not specifically for Europe. If they're going to edit it at all, it'll be for all of the Western world. But I don't even see them doing any kind of edit for the Western world. Because they seem to have some pride that they seem to sometimes have too much pride is what I'm getting at.
What I see this damaging long term is the European market. I think there will be some ramifications in the US market, but I feel like it's just going to be a lot of companies being like, all right, here's a US release. Europe can figure it out.
I feel like, especially Square Enix and Dragon Quest in particular, I could see them, when it comes to re-releases especially, just pulling out of the Western market with it. They just won't release them.
I don't know, man. I mean, Dragon Quest 11 sold pretty good here.
Yeah, but
I don't see them cutting out an entire market just because it doesn't still include Europe.
Well, Dragon Quest 9 sold the highest that the series had ever sold in Western markets, and after that, they immediately pulled out of Western markets.
Yeah, I don't know.
So
I mean,
I don't see sales numbers affecting it at all when it comes to Square Enix, especially Dragon Quest. They don't seem to care. And they have pulled out of the Western market so many times in the past that I would not at all be surprised if they did. But I don't see them releasing in North America without also releasing in Europe. I just don't see that happening in the modern world.
I can see them doing it, and a lot of companies are releasing, Asian releases with English.
Right? That I see more likely.
I don't know. I think if anything, it's just more hoops to jump through. But I don't know that a lot of companies are just going to leave money on the table.
I think most of them won't, but I could definitely see Dragon Quest doing it for some reason.
I don't know. I think you're panicking about it.
I think I've just been burned so many times by all the other times they pulled out of the Western market that I'm just expecting it at this point.
Yeah. Take-Two is suing Grand Theft Auto and Vice City reverse engineering projects that were previously shut down.
Yeah.
Not
a good look.
Fuck you, fans.
Right?
I don't think Take-Two gives a shit about what they look like.
They do not. As long as people keep buying NBA 2K, they do not care.
There you go. A bunch of Final Fantasy games added to streaming between PlayStation Now and Xbox Game Pass.
Yeah,
just
I think
lots of
7 through 13 betwing the two are all on streaming now.
That is a lot. I've been meaning to retry 13.
Yeah, it is now on Game Pass.
There you go. And finally, TGS is right around the corner. So be prepared for TGS. It's going to happen.
Yeah. So if there's a bunch of news that we didn't cover, it's probably because it happened right after we recorded this.
Sorry.
And the weeks after. But we are already seeing a bunch of headlines about this is going to happen at TGS or this isn't going to happen at TGS. And, we'll figure it out when it happens.
Let's get to the topic at hand. This week we're talking Final Fantasy 3, which is to say Final Fantasy 3, not 6.
Right.
Which is
a confusion we shouldn't have to deal with, right?
The actual third game.
Yes.
Number 3. The Famicom game.
Right.
And it's at least as final as the first two.
True.
And still mostly fantasy.
Mostly, yes. Some sci-fi.
This was developed and published by Square. It came out on the Famicom April 27th, 1990.
Yep.
And there was the Pixel Remaster, PC Mobile Remaster on July 28th, 2021.
That seems pretty recent.
It is very recent. As far as first encounters, I played the 3DS remake of Final Fantasy 3 when it came out on DS because I played the GBA games and I loved them, and this was the next thing. And I was like, all right, I just finished 6. Now I'll play 3. I don't know what the fuck is happening. And I enjoyed that one greatly. And then when I got my NES Classic, actually not when I got it, it was when I hacked it. I put in a couple hours on the Famicom version and just ended up not sticking with it just because I just didn't. And then I was flip-flopping on this one for a while because I love the DS game.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell if it was... I knew it was different.
Yeah.
You had informed me. You were like, it's pretty different. And I couldn't tell if it was different in a way that I would enjoy more or less.
Yeah.
And then finally you just bought me the game. So
I did.
Figure it out on my own.
Yeah. I once NES emulation was viable, Final Fantasy 3 was one of the last games that any emulator could run. It was a while before any of them could run Final Fantasy 3.
All those frog sprites.
Yeah, it was hard, man. A lot of frogs. And of course, I started playing Final Fantasy on the NES back in the day. So my order, like your order, would have been 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 3.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, it was 1 fake 2 fake 3 7. And in the middle there, just before 7 came out, is when I started to discover emulation, and there was a partial translation for 2, and there was no attempted translation for 3 because the emulators could barely handle it in the first place.
Yeah.
And so I had fumbled around with it, and I was like, oh, technically, this is really impressive for an NES game. It's a shame I don't have any fucking clue what's going on.
Yeah.
And then eventually there was a partial fan translation, which pushed me through the entire game. I barely knew what was going on, and the translation fell apart completely at the end. And then there was finally a full fan translation. I got to play it I finally sat down to play the full fan translation like months before the DS game was announced. And so I had just finished it, and then they announced it for DS, and I was like, oh, now you're going to release it over here.
Yeah.
And then the DS game came out, and I played it, and I was like, this is really good. It's slightly different, though. I wanted that. I mean, this is good, but I wanted that. So it had always kind of rubbed me the wrong way that we never got the original version. So the Pixel remaster was very welcome in my eyes.
Yeah. Tell me about the development on Final Fantasy 3.
So you got most of the same development staff as the first 2 games. You had writer-director Hironobu Sakaguchi, artist Yoshitaka Amano, composer Nobuo Uematsu, several others that had worked on the previous games as well. Also, like the previous games, the programming was handled almost single-handedly by Iranian-American programmer Nasser Gabelli. I hope I pronounced that right. It might have been Jabelli. I don't remember. But in an interview with him, he mentioned that his work visa had expired early in the development of the game. So he was deported back to California.
Yeah.
And the team didn't want to have to communicate via long-distance telephone or fax messages, so they all temporarily moved to California to develop Final Fantasy 3.
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny looking back on it, because this was when JRPGs were not at all selling in the West, and this one did not come out in the West, but it was mostly developed in California, just outside of Sacramento.
Yeah.
The designer on the game, Hiromichi Tanaka, he confirmed that an English version of the game was in development, and there is some early promo materials that they had sent to trade shows showing potential box art for Final Fantasy 2 and 3 on NES. But they did scrap the game, one, because they were already focusing on Super NES development, and two, because they didn't think a translation could fit on the cartridge, because it was already 512 kilobits, which was one of the biggest possible cartridges you could get. And also Final Fantasy 4 had already pretty much released in Japan, and they were still working on the translation of 2, and they were like, yeah, nah, let's just jump ahead. And when they were working on it, they weren't sure if the Super Famicom would sell well at all, because the idea of new console generations was not yet established.
Yeah,
so
it was a new thing,
right? So they thought maybe the Super Famicom would flop and the Famicom would continue to be the primary console. So they'd actually started work on a 4th Famicom game, while they were working on Final Fantasy III and what would become Final Fantasy IV. So they were working on 3 Final Fantasy games at once. But then once the Super Famicom sales became clear that it was a success, they're like, nope. And they just threw that other game in the trash. And,
I wonder what that was.
Oh, there's a couple of screenshots out there of the potential Final Fantasy IV for Famicom, but it never got far enough to really be anything.
Right. Let's talk presentation.
Yeah. When you look at the original NES game, it reuses a lot of assets from the first 2 games.
I feel like it looks a lot cleaner. Yeah. It looks a lot nicer. Like you can definitely see a visual difference, but just individual sprite work.
Right.
It's kind of more of the same.
Yeah, and
for the most part.
You can see some of the new sprites that were introduced for this one were almost directly reused in 4. Just recolored so they would look a little bit better on the Super Nintendo, but it's still just that 8-bit sprite. They're not fooling anybody.
I do really like the soundtrack in 3. Specifically, I really like the airship tune from the third airship. There's 4 airships.
There are 4 airships.
The
first
third
3 use the
that goes
same
underwater.
Oh, the underwater theme.
No, just the regular flying one, but it's the one that goes underwater.
Don't the first 3 airships all use the same airship theme?
They might, but I was only in the first 2 for a little bit, and I was in the third one for a long time, and then the fourth one for a long time.
That's
so
fair.
I may just not remember the first 2 airship themes.
Yeah, I believe the first 3 use the same one, but it is excellent. It's an excellent theme. And also, I don't remember if I put it in the notes or not, but in the PlayStation 1 Chocobo Racing game, you can unlock the 4th airship from Final Fantasy III in its 8-bit sprite as a playable character, and it uses both of the airship themes. It's great.
Yeah, and then obviously I don't know if we specifically said it, but we did. For this show, I played through the Pixel Remaster version.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And this was because I didn't play 1 or 2 on the Pixel Remaster versions, but I really like what they did presentation wise with the Pixel Remasters.
Yeah,
I think it's. I'll be honest, whenever they first announced them and they were kind of going on about the sprite work, I was like, all right, you're kind of getting up your own ass about this. But it does look really good. Yeah. I prefer it vastly to like what they did with
5 and
Final
6.
Fantasy IV Complete Collection on PSP, that kind of like really softening and rounding of everything, so it looks like almost like flash animation.
Yeah.
This does still look very much like 8-bit sprites, even though it's not. It's very much upgraded versions of them.
I would say it looks like 16-bit sprites, just cleaned up and cheating using extra colors that they shouldn't have.
I also really like, and people pointed this out on stream because I played half the game on stream. The special effects they added, so spell effects and things look really cool. They also added a really cool like fog and water effect that they look really nice layered on the graphics here. I really do like this presentation quite a bit.
Absolutely. One other thing that I want to say about the original that I forgot to mention a minute ago is the NES version was the first game in the series and one of the first JRPGs to display the numbers, the damage or health numbers, right on top of the character or enemy sprite when you're attacking in battle, which for me was just the most amazing thing that to see that on an NES game.
You do forget how little information the first Final Fantasy gives you when you're playing, and then it feels like you're flying blind half the time.
Yeah, well, it pops up constant little menu boxes on the first one. It's just like every time you attack, there's like 3 or 4 menu boxes for it. God forbid you cast a spell on multiple enemies, you'll get like 12 menu boxes.
How many on the Famicom version were status effects indicated on the sprites or in a way that you could see them as they were ongoing?
So they actually had little text descriptions that just hovered in front of your character the whole time.
Okay. Did the original NES game, did it have status effect indicators?
Yeah, so if you got poisoned or turned to stone or whatever in the first game, your character would just kind of duck down and there would be some... And it's the same in
general, like something's wrong with you.
And the same was with 2 or 3, but 3, when it was time for you to input your commands, it would pop up with text actually telling you what status effect it was. And if you had multiple status effects, it would flip through them. And I'm suddenly hoping that I am in fact remembering that right, and I'm thinking of the correct game. But I'm pretty sure that was FF3. But also, the downside to that was the NES color palette wasn't quite capable of a ton of colors at once. So it was a little tough to tell the difference between damage and health numbers in battle.
Right.
But the fact that they even tried it was really impressive because, again, by the time I played this, the PlayStation was around. So, like, technically, it honestly wasn't impressive. But seeing it from an NES game on an emulator was still really impressive to me.
Yeah. I was a little nervous because there was a lot of reports of screen tearing with the Pixel remasters. Yeah. I experienced no noticeable screen tearing on my system. I did have some kind of weird issues where it would like reset what window type I had. Like I'd boot it up and it'd be windowed when I was playing full screen before. Like just weird,
They did recently issue a patch that supposedly fixed that.
Oh, there you go.
That was
and then obviously the game by default has a completely unusable font.
Oh, I don't know what the hell they were doing there.
I never thought in the Pixel remaster version, obviously. The Famicom version looks fine.
Right.
When the game came out and I heard everyone bitching about the font, I was like, what a bunch of dorks. What a lame thing to complain about. And I think I was talking to you when I first booted the game up, and I was immediately like, this needs to change now. This is horrible. What were they fucking thinking?
Yeah.
Thankfully, it's very easy to patch the font.
Yeah. You can actually patch the font without even downloading anything. You can just use the Japanese character file that's already downloaded with the game, and it looks significantly better. But the fan community has released so many custom fonts that are great.
I think I was using the FF6 font.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. But yeah, presentation wise, the Pixel remaster looks. I like that one a lot.
Oh yeah, I love
it's
it.
a very good looking game, very good playing game. And other than those two weird issues, which were easy enough to fix,
right?
I didn't have much going on,
right?
Problem wise. Let's talk story.
Yeah,
because there is one in Final Fantasy 3.
There
not
is.
a lot of one.
Yeah, it's not a super heavy story or anything, but it does have a narrative.
You just wrote 4 kids fall in a hole and inadvertently become the warriors of light.
That's true. That's pretty much the entire game right there. Done.
Now, the DS version, the DS remake of Final Fantasy 3 really gives the party has individual characters.
Right. And also
They're
you don't have them all at first. You have to go find them and recruit them. They have different they kind of have different backgrounds.
In the Famicom version and Pixel Remaster by extension, it's 4 identical
Onion Knights
siblings.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to me is they have no individual even dialogue.
No.
The 4 characters in your party, anytime anyone in your party speaks, it's just blue text, and it never says which of your party members is saying it.
It was one of them.
Anytime your party is addressed and in the context of the text needs to be addressed as a single individual, they only ever address the first member of your party.
Yeah.
And
which is especially hilarious because that's whoever the princess falls in love with is whoever your top character is.
I did random names, and my top character is named Glitz. She fell in love with Glitz.
I'm curious if you were to rearrange the characters halfway through the game, if she would just change who her love interest is.
Oh, I don't know. I never thought to do that.
I want to go back and do that now.
And so. The characters, I mean, there is a character story, and the story is identical for all 4 characters, and it's, you 4 are orphans, and you are raised by this old elder, and I think his wife, and they have, like, names like Papa and Nana or something. There you go,
Topapa and Nina, I believe.
Nina.
Yeah.
And so there is a backstory for your characters, but it's an identical one that is literally as light as possible while still existing.
It's 4 nearly identical orphans who happen to be very best friends, all raised by the same people, and all just incidentally becoming the warriors of light.
And because there are always standing single file, people only ever address the one in the front.
Right.
That's
well, they're on each other's shoulders in a trench coat, so they only see the one.
They see the top head. They say, "You're very tall," and he says, "Yes, we are." But there is some story.
Yeah.
And I do think the story's okay. Really, the story kind of plays out with these side characters. The big notable side characters are Desh, Sarah, Sid, Arya, and Alice.
Right.
And they play out in these different episodic
but
situations
what about the four fake warriors of light?
I did like that story segment. So you have these characters that are kind of playing out, and they're in kind of their weird ways more main character-esque than your actual main characters.
Right.
And they'll often join the party, not in combat or anything, but just follow you around as you go around finding these crystals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And about halfway through the game, you run into another party.
Yeah, it's 4 old men.
That's 4 old men, and they're like, "Oh, we're the Warriors of Light."
Yeah.
And it's I thought that was really cute. I thought it was very funny. And it plays out as you would expect. They're basically totally inept, and you step in, and they're like, "Oh, we see that now that you're the Warriors of Light.
You were able to defeat a single enemy. You must be the Warriors of Light."
But the story's, pretty. I don't want to say boilerplate because it's not like Dragon Quest 1 level story where it's like go get the princess. Like there is some nuance by virtue of these side characters. Like Desh has lost his memory and he's got a girlfriend that's in love with him and he's not going to return there until he's done his stuff or whatever. And then Sid's wife is sick, and then Arya just fucking dies in the middle of the game.
Yeah. Moments after you meet her too.
They never address it.
Well, they briefly address it right when it happens. They're like, "Oh no, and then they're like, Arya." Anyway,
you also hear you meet Dogi and Yune, who are kind of your 2 mentor characters.
Right.
It is their former colleague Zandy or Zand or however you say it.
I've always said Zandy.
Who has been working with the darkness to unleash said darkness. What I do like about the story is, like most Final Fantasy games, and I feel like Final Fantasy, a lot of people treat it as like the default JRPG.
Right.
They're like, oh, it's the kind of boring, Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy stories, even in these earlier games, they get fucking weird at the end.
It's true. They do. And often they start to embrace sci-fi elements at the end.
Yes.
Almost all
and
of
this
them
one,
do.
by the end of it, you find out that there are the 4 crystals and the 4 Warriors of Light, but then there are also dark crystals and the dark Warriors of Light.
Right. Who also look identical.
Yes. And it ends up being this like weird, you're basically fighting a cloud in outer space on top of Negaverse crystals.
Correct.
So it does have that element of Final Fantasy weirdness, And I say all of this, and I mention all of these characters and the parts of the story I like and stuff, because the next thing I want to say is that, story-wise, it is possibly the lightest Final Fantasy game outside of literally the very first game, and I'm not even totally sure about that. It might be the lightest.
Right. Yeah, it occasionally has, like, some characterization just to point you in the right direction. But even the characters that it does establish, sometimes you kind of have to go out of your way to learn anything about them, because this most recent playthrough, because it had been a while since I'd played through FF3, I never talked to Desh's girlfriend at all. Like
really?
I never encountered her. She was not a part of my life.
So at the end of the game, you're like, who the fuck is this person?
Yeah, exactly. When he goes back home and she's like, "Oh, Desh, I love you." I'm like, I did not know you existed. Where the fuck did you come from? And then I went back and just for this episode, I went and replayed most of the 3D version again, and it forces you to talk to her and makes her a part of the story. Yeah, and I was like, oh, this would have made that make way more sense. I see why they force you to talk to her in this one. That's a good idea.
What it feels like to me, all the stories in this game, they feel like the beginning chapter of any given section of a later Final Fantasy game.
Right, that makes sense.
Like it feels like, you're introduced to Sid and his wife is sick, and then I see this kind of turn into a story. Oh, she just needs an elixir. Well, there's one hidden in the town. Here you go. Oh, it's resolved. Okay, well,
let's see you guys later.
I guess we'll see you later. Yeah, And so it's like these. They feel like they're starting these stories, and the stories instantly resolve, and they're like, all right, go to the next crystal. Bye. Yeah. Like there's.
Yeah, in the original NES version, in the first town, there's a NPC that you can talk to. You don't have to, but you can, and they will say, you can use items on village people that you meet. Just press this button when you approach someone, and it will open up a menu to let you use an item. There's like 3 times in the game you ever have to do that. Ever. And one is Sid's wife, and I don't even off the top of my head remember the other 2. But in the newer versions, including the Pixel Remaster, if you can use an item, it automatically prompts you when you talk
use
to that
one
person.
on Yune to wake her up.
Yeah, that's right.
And then there's one more, I don't remember what it was.
Yeah, but there's just a couple of little things like that I think somebody in the mini town, you have to use an item on somebody, an antidote or something. But that's the only times that ever comes up. And so they just streamlined it by putting it on an existing examine button, as opposed to having this dedicated button that will allow you to waste items on literally any NPC you meet.
Right.
And 99+% of the time it does nothing at all. So I do appreciate that enhancement in the new versions.
For sure. Let's talk gameplay. Because I'm excited about this part. This is a job system Final Fantasy game.
Yes.
Which is to say it uses the best Final Fantasy system that was ever made, which is the job system.
Just like in Final Fantasy X-2.
Which is it a job system? I keep meaning to play 10. I disliked 10 so much that I never even bothered with 10-2.
Not only is 10-2 a job system game, but get this. They have a job called Gun Mage.
God damn it. God damn it.
Yeah.
I guess I'm going to have to fucking play that.
That was enough to get me to buy the game.
So it is job system based. What that means is you can you unlock new jobs as the game progresses. Some of them, and this is where it gets kind of weird. Some of them are strictly better versions of earlier jobs, like in Final Fantasy 1, where it's like thief to ninja. Makes sense. Other jobs are just weird shit that you'll never use because they kind of suck.
Yeah, a lot of them seem to have a sole purpose, and sometimes that sole purpose is moments after you unlock them, and sometimes it is hours after you unlock them and have forgotten that you unlocked that job.
Yes, and I do want to talk about this because they utilize these jobs for these sections of the game where the game doesn't force you to, but through different challenges tries to illustrate to you why you should have a whole party of this one specific job for this one specific area.
Right.
And it also does lots of little things where there's a lot of like turning yourself into toads and making yourself mini to get into different areas. The game really wants you to explore this job system.
Right.
And I was listening to another podcast talk about this game, and I know there are other podcasts. I just learned about them. And they were complaining about these gimmick dungeons. And how it's just really tedious and annoying, and I very much disagreed. I feel like these kind of gimmick sections force you to explore things like mini and toad status effects and weird party combinations that otherwise you would just never use because, well, I'm just going to be the best party members because there's best ones, and then there's better upgrades of those ones.
Yeah. You know, and coming from later games and going back to this, in the later games, especially in 4 and 7, Mini and Toad are very much negative status effects. They are things you don't want. So the first time that I played this back in the late 90s, I was incredibly frustrated by the points where it forces you to be Mini or Toad because it just felt like I was intentionally kneecapping myself.
Right.
But in this,
you are, but the design expects that.
Exactly. And in this most recent playthrough, knowing that it's coming up, and being able to prepare for it even a little makes those sections really not very difficult at all. But if you don't know that they are coming, I can definitely understand how somebody could be really frustrated by what could end up being a pretty high difficulty spike if you're not prepared for it.
I do, and we were talking about this in Discord because I was thinking about how disparate Final Fantasy 3 and 4 always felt to me.
Right.
I mean, they feel like polar opposites. Final Fantasy 3 is like, here's a big job system and basically no story, and Final Fantasy 4 is like, no, you get these characters, and here's the goddamn story. You better pay attention.
It's true. But, and they were under development at the same time, too.
True. What I do see is I notice that lineage with these job system segments where, like, there's a boss where you don't have to have a Dragoon, but you're basically going to get screwed if you don't have a Dragoon always jumping out of their ultra-powerful attack. And it's a segment right after you unlock Dragoon.
Right.
And you get a bunch of Dragoon gear.
Yep.
And the game's very much like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Hey, you should have at least a couple Dragoons in your party for this upcoming boss fight.
Yeah.
And I feel that like with Final Fantasy IV, it's the same kind of thing where they're like, no, we want you to have specific party combinations for specific parts of the game.
Right.
Instead of implying it, we are going to force you, though.
You will use these characters.
So it does kind of reveal a little bit more of that kind of design ethos heritage there that I had not seen before between these two games.
And also, you can see a lot of similarities in overworld exploration and village exploration between the two games. They both love to hide items underneath grass tiles. They both love to have hidden passages in trees that are completely not an area you would think to look at. You do see a lot of similarities there. Also, some other things I do want to mention about the original 8-bit version of the game. It was the first game in the series to have auto-targeting. And in fact, one of the very few NES JRPGs to have auto-targeting, where if the enemy that you targeted dies, your character won't just attack the air. It will just switch to something else. Also, it was the first game that had fat chocobos, which... Thankfully, the Pixel Remaster expands your inventory so large you'd never even notice that fat chocobos have a purpose.
They're basically vestigial.
Yes. But in the original game, you had a teeny tiny inventory that was constantly overfilled. And so any items you didn't want to sell, you could store in a fat chocobo. Also, this was the first game that had job-specific abilities, because in the first game, though you had different jobs, every character's menu was the same. It was action, fight, or it was fight, magic, use potion, use item, flee, or parry. That was all your abilities. Whereas in this one, you have jump, you have steal, you have summon, you have throw, which
kick.
Right. It makes it much more dynamic. Also, kick wasn't even in the original. It was added for the Pixel Remaster.
Oh, really? Was it?
But it was also the first game that had summon magic. It was also the first game that had Moogles, even though they don't serve too much purpose. Also, something that you probably wouldn't remember is that the original game made you use capacity points to change jobs. And if you ran out of capacity points, you were stuck on whatever job you were on. And you had to go grind for a while.
That sucks because, and this is me having played Final Fantasy V before, which is a great job system game.
Yes.
And a very well-balanced job system game where all the jobs are pretty useful, honestly, in their own ways.
Yeah.
There are a lot of useless jobs in this one. There are some jobs that I'm like, why is it even in the fucking game?
Yeah. Scholar is the most useless just because its only ability is available as a white magic spell by the time that you unlock Scholar.
And I do feel, and this is where I kind of lodged some weird complaints about the game. One, summons feel almost completely useless.
Yeah.
The really powerful ones are okay, but even then they're on par with the most powerful spells that you're going to find.
Yeah.
I will say this as a positive. This does use the older kind of D&D style magic system where it doesn't use just a pool of magic points and everything costs a certain amount of magic points. You have so many casts of each level of spell.
Right, just like the first
which
game.
Is, just like the first game, which I've never played a game with the original magic system, a Final Fantasy game with it. I've only ever played the GBA games, which they all... Yeah, so I'd never played the original NES games with it, I guess until I played it on my NES Classic, because the DS remake uses the MP system.
That's true. Actually, does it?
Doesn't it?
Because I was just playing... I thought that it still used this system when I was just playing it.
It might, and I'm lying if that's the case, because I did play the DS one, and that must just mean I don't remember doing it. But going into this, I was like, oh man, I really just like MP. I've really come to like this system more because there's no math. I don't have to sit there and go, all right, well, there's going to be at least 2-3 more rounds of combat in this boss battle, and I need to cast Cura, and that costs 27 points, and I've got 64 points left, so how many times can I cast? Like, you're not having to do that thing.
Oh, yeah.
You just look and you're like, I can cast Cura 4 more times. I do wish, because this only lets you learn 3 spells per level.
Right, which is also just like the first game.
Yes. My issue with it is that I really wish with the Pixel Remaster they had made it so that you could teach everyone any spell and just equip them to the slots.
Yeah.
It is still kind of a tedious pain in the ass to like go find and purchase and learn the spells to specific if you want to have a specific magical loadout.
Right.
So that's kind of a pain in the
However,
ass.
at least you can unlearn them, and then they turn back into items that you can reuse. I don't recall if the original game did that. I think in the original game, if you forgot a spell, it just vanished.
Yeah, I feel like maybe they do. I'm not sure, to be honest. I only unlearned a couple of spells.
Yeah, but this one they definitely turn back into items.
I do still find it frustrating that even in the Pixel Remaster, there's not really a way to tell the order characters are going to have their actions.
True.
Which makes planning and boss battles real difficult sometimes.
Yeah. Which is honestly how most purely turn-based games like this work. Stuff like the older Dragon Quest.
Obviously, ATB fixes it. Right. It's which is starts with 4. 4 is the first ATB game, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. I do also find it weird translation-wise. All of the summons are not named after what they are, which obviously they were trying to fit it on the ROM on the Famicom. Mm-hmm. But in the Pixel Remaster, it makes no sense. Like, Leviathan is shortened to just like Leviath. And I was like, okay.
But that's exactly how the NES version was too.
But
the Famicom version.
Bahamut is shortened to Bahammer, which is not shortened.
Right. That's how the Famicom version is too. The Japanese version, the name of the spell was slightly different than the thing it summoned.
That's weird.
And it was weird. Fortunately, by the time FF4 came out, they stopped doing that.
Yeah. I do really love the Pixel Remaster auto battle system because I have a lot of issues with auto battle functions in a lot of games. A lot of them are shitty. What I love about this one is whatever the last action you selected was for whatever character, whenever you auto battle, that is the exact action they will do.
Right.
And it lets you kind of... Yeah, it lets you kind of on the fly craft your own auto battle settings without having to deal with like tactics menus or shit like that. You just go through, you do one turn of what you want them to do, and then you hit the auto battle button and it speeds along. Yep. Which is so nice. Obviously not something that was in the Famicom original.
Right, obviously. But, and it does add a lot, especially to even boss battles, because you can just set one character to cure all the time and one character to use his powerful magic spell or whatever. And then again, just auto battle like you would for any other battle. And it does make things nice.
I think my biggest complaint about Final Fantasy III is it really wants you to use specific jobs at specific times. That's kind of the whole conceit of the game is we've got this job system and we're going to make you use it. But the last leg of the game, that all just kind of falls by the wayside. And it's like, okay, here's ninjas and sage, and you're not going to do anything except have ninjas and sages, because why would you? Any other class is stupid now.
Yeah, those two jobs are so overpowered that it it completely eliminates any strategy from the game at that point.
Yeah, so I feel like the job system is a little inconsistent, and then by the end totally just falls apart as you just have irrelevant. That's the word I'm looking for. There's no point in all of these different jobs you've been leveling, because now you're just ninjas, and now you're just ninjas and sages, and who cares?
Right.
Which that kind of sucks, you know. Now, granted, by the time you get there, you feel like you've earned it.
Right.
You know, it's exciting to be like completely
overpowered,
unbeatable. Yeah. But I do wish it was that, they found a way to make the end of the game kind of play more into the job system like the rest of the game does. Like, I'd like to see maybe a dungeon where to go through and find each dark crystal, which is what you do in the last dungeon. They're like, all right, well, for this section of the dark crystal dungeon, you should be these class combinations, or it'll put you in challenge situations where it would be, smart to change it up.
Yeah, that would have made more sense.
Out of all the dungeons, the last one is just like, oh no, you're ninjas.
Right. And the 3D remake did change that up a little bit just by rebalancing all the jobs. So Ninja and Sage were not as drastically overpowered as they were on the original game. However, it also unlocked a new Onion Knight job based on the default job in the original game that you had to jump through a lot of hoops to unlock it. But once you did, it was a super job. And it became one of those, well, why not just use this from now on?
Which I'm okay with it existing as like an extra thing you do.
Right. Well, in the original game, Eureka was seen as a completely optional area. It was seen as, this is your challenge dungeon. You can go here to get all the best equipment and these 2 super jobs. Yeah. But it's not that difficult of an area, and it gives you so much power that it's basically essential to the game.
Right. Let's talk specifically any pixel remaster differences that we haven't been through yet. I feel like we've gone through a lot of them.
Yeah. So you got the 8-directional movement now instead of 4-directional, which doesn't affect the game very much at all.
Right.
We already talked that the capacity points aren't there anymore. They did add the kick, which we mentioned earlier. Also, Blade Blitz for Dark Knights is just amazing. In the original, they just had attack, defend, and actually no, they had white magic in the original. They
kick and blade blitz are what make Black Belt and Dark Knights worth using in the pixel remaster. I mean, those two abilities are what make them worth it.
Oh yeah, a big one for me is that arrows are no longer consumables, because in the original,
just like real life.
In the original, you constantly had to buy more arrows if you wanted to use a ranger, whereas in this one, you just find that type of arrow and equip it, and you have as many as you want.
Oh, I do want to talk, because you're about to mention the mini-maps they added. The mini-maps very much break Final Fantasy III.
That's true.
Final Fantasy III is a game that loves secret tunnels and areas, even in mandatory sections.
Oh, yeah.
And you can just open a map of an area. One, it shows you any chests there.
Right.
And two, if you're standing in a hidden hallway,
it illuminates
whenever you open the map, it illuminates the whole. Which, to be fair, really all it did for me was eliminate the need to use a guide.
Right.
And you can easily turn the mini-map off.
Oh, yeah. And
so if you're...
In the original, if you stepped into a hidden passageway, it would illuminate them all on the screen that you could see.
You just couldn't see the whole map.
Yeah, but being able to see the whole mini-map of the entire area really does remove any challenge that would have been posed.
So if you're the kind that likes really scouring and exploring dungeons, maybe turn the mini-map off, which you can do. You just hit a button and turn it off. I mean, if anything, it's kind of like having a guide built into the game, which I'm in favor of, but it does sort of break some stuff.
Yeah. So if you're looking for the challenge, just turn it off. Also, they added the quick save feature, which that's good. They added the ability to heal yourself with the dark crystals in the final dungeon. Without that, the slog of a dungeon between 3 dungeons straight with basically no heal points that's rough.
I feel like having basically infinite heals right there at the end does kind of make it a little too easy.
Right.
I would have liked to have seen. I don't know. I don't want to complain about it being too easy, but it really did kind of ruin any sort of real challenge.
Yeah. If they had at least limited it to like a one-time use for those, maybe that could have been a little easier. But also, any of the rare enemies that were very rare in the original have all had their frequency of appearance altered so that they show up more often. Also, several dummied out enemies from the original were added back into this game that were not in the original. They're all completely incidental enemies, so it doesn't matter, though. And also, several of the jobs and bosses were retooled to include some of the changes that were seen in the 3D remake, like the kick ability, for example. So it did kind of to bridge the gap between the original and the 3D remake.
Right. Let's talk reception. It got a 36 from Famitsu, a 9, a 9, a 10, and an 8, making it the third highest rated game of 1990, behind Dragon Quest IV and F-Zero.
And also, that is weird. Also of note, that at that point, I believe it was one of 7 games ever to have received a 36 or higher from Famitsu.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was... Back then, Famitsu was very strict on their reviews, so it was uncommon for a game to get that high.
The DS version received an average of 78, according to Game Rankings, which... is lower than I would have placed it at the time, but it's not a bad score.
No, it was a above average score, but there were a lot of reviews at the time that said that it was still a little too antiquated, even with the revamped mechanics.
It was tough. I remember the reason I didn't finish it is because I fucking couldn't. It was so hard. I made it right to the end, and I was like, oh my God, it's impossible.
It requires a ton of grinding.
And granted, at that time, I'd only when did it come out? It came out 06?
Yep.
I mean, I'd only been playing JRPGs for a few years at that point, and that was a pretty hardcore one.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about the legacy for Final Fantasy III.
So it got a Virtual Console release in Japan on the Wii, the Wii U, and the 3DS between 2009 and 2014. It was also on the Famicom Mini instead of the first Final Fantasy, which is what we got over here in the West. There was a remaster planned for the WonderSwan Color following the release of 1 and 2, but it was skipped in favor of 4 because they didn't think 3 would fit on the cartridge, but I guess 4 could. And then, of course, there was the 3D remake, which we've mentioned many times. Came out in 2006, developed by Matrix. And it was later ported to iOS, Android, PSP, Ouya, a Windows Phone, and PC. I wanted to make sure that we mentioned that Ouya version.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was rebuilt in 3D, had a ton of rebalances to job classes and interactions. That had the new story for the player characters. It also introduced the freelancer job, which was your new default job instead of Onion Knight. Mm-hmm. You also had your character's stats decline anytime you changed jobs. There was no longer capacity points. Instead, when you changed jobs, you would have a debuff for a number of battles that your stats would be declined. And then once that debuff went away, then there was no more penalty.
Which I feel like both the capacity points and that debuff both really kind of go completely against what the game seems to want.
Right.
Which is you changing jobs a bunch and trying different stuff.
Exactly. So I'm glad they did remove all of that from the Pixel Remaster. Yeah. I feel like it benefited from that.
For sure.
And then, of course, there was MogNet, which was a communication system so that you could talk to other Final Fantasy 3 DS players via Nintendo Wi-Fi. That was removed from future ports, so they had to adjust to the way you unlock the Onion Knight job because of that.
Yeah.
Of course, in Dissidia, Onion Knight and Cloud of Darkness are both playable characters in all 3 Dissidia games. And then when Final Fantasy XIV was re-released as Realm Reborn, the first casual 24-player raid was based on Crystal Tower and had several bosses and pieces of music from Final Fantasy III throughout the dungeon, which is really great. If you are a fan of Final Fantasy III at all, at least look up some videos of the Crystal Tower from FF14 because it's really a great tribute.
As far as final thoughts, I think I do want to say I think the Pixel Remaster version of Final Fantasy III is far and away the best version.
I agree.
I do miss some of the characterization from the DS remake, but the DS remake just it doesn't quite fix enough to make this feel like something I could play today.
Yeah.
But I also feel like, as much as I very much enjoyed the presentation of the Pixel Remaster, as much as I would say that if you want to play Final Fantasy III, this is the way to do it. Go play it. It's good. At the same time, I don't know that and I don't even know if it's a fair comparison, but it's just because I played them out of order. In my head, I'm like, well, is it better than 5? And I'm like, well, hell no. It's nowhere even near as good as 5, which is, and I only compare them because it's the most direct comparison being another job system game.
Yeah.
And it's nowhere near as good, but I think it's still a solid game. I think the Pixel Remaster in the lower difficulty of the Pixel Remaster version makes it just a long enough experience. I think if this was like a 30, 35, 40-hour game, it would fall to pieces.
That's fair.
It is just not built for that. But I think I beat it in like 15 hours.
Yeah, I think 15 and 20.
As like a 15 to 18-hour game, I think it's great for what it is, it's a lot of fun, and I really do like the Pixel Remaster presentation. And it's a good time. Yeah. If 5 was also out, I'd be like, oh, well, go play 5 for sure. It's the better job system game. But then maybe if you want more, go play 3. As it stands, we're sitting here waiting on 5. I think it's a good 15 hours. I think it's just long enough. This version makes it just easy enough, and it's just enjoyable enough to have I had a really good time with it. Honestly, I really did.
I'm gonna partially agree with you.
Oh, no.
Because I do think that this is the best version of it. I think the Pixel Remaster is the one to go with. I have always preferred 3 to 5.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I know
that's fascinatingly wrong.
I know 5 has always been very popular in Japan, but it has always been one of my least favorites.
Interesting.
I have never fully gotten into 5. I pushed myself through it one time, but I was never a real fan of it. I felt like it... I'll get into it some other episode, but 3 I always thought was a bit more streamlined, even if it's
definitely 5 is like, let's see how long we can fucking make this train ride last.
Right?
Like
now I agree, 3 has some pretty useless jobs. It was clear that they were still figuring out what they were doing. They were not yet masters of the job class system, but I feel like the conciseness of it gives it a little bit of an edge. Plus, I feel like it has a little more charm. I know Final Fantasy V is almost entirely built on charm.
You're hurting
but
me.
Having come between 4 and 6, I feel like 5's charm didn't live up to either of those. So I tend to lean towards 3 of the 2, but they're both still excellent games.
Show is canceled, obviously. We're done. No, and if it wasn't clear, I do highly recommend Final Fantasy 3 Pixel Remaster. I think it's a great version of the game.
Absolutely.
I think it's exactly what it needs to be. I don't think I'm ever going to play it again after 5 comes out on Pixel Remaster, but it's a good game. I had a really good time with it.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed it. My 15 hours. I don't think I would have put in 20 hours, 25 hours.
I probably put in 35 to 40 hours on the NES version, if I remember right.
Yeah, man, that's...
I think
I will say that between 3 and 5, 3 was the one that desperately needed this remaster.
Absolutely. Yeah. That is
absolutely just needed it. And I'm glad that they did it. And this time around, they seemed to fix the things that needed fixing. Yeah. And they did a very good job with it.
Yeah. But it's and also one criticism that I heard from somebody in our Discord was that the mobile version of this, while the mobile Pixel remasters have generally been very well done, they have excellent tap to move controls built in. It will not tap to move to a secret passage no matter what. So
that's frustrating.
You have to switch back to D-pad controls on your phone in order to move into and through a hidden passage, which that is a really frustrating point, and I feel like I hope that's something that they fix.
I do think the Pixel Remaster version of Final Fantasy 3 really does completely, obviously not on that mobile version, completely remove all of the tedium from the game.
Yeah, I believe that.
And the only real negatives still standing are just kind of some of the weirder, design choices that are only really so odd. Like, if I'd been playing the game for 40 hours, I don't know that I would feel the way I do about Ninja and Sage.
Right.
But when Ninja and Sage are coming 5 hours after, like, Black Belt, I'm like, man, this is a weird progression,
Right. Yeah, it does. It does feel pretty... it's got a very fast clip to it on this new version.
I'd say, Saturn, that I give it a 36 out of 40.
How many games have you given that to previously, though?
So far, I've only given out 136.
Oh, that's good.
But it's also the first time I've ever graded on that scale. So, make of that what you will. And just go from there. I also give, I'm going to give out another one. I'm going to give a 36 out of 40 to our Patreon at patreon.com/retrowarriors.
What could they do to make it a 40, Justin?
Well, I don't know. Maybe, improve the mobile app for creators. It's a little light on things.
You're gonna blame our Patreons for the Patreon app?
No, well, I'm just saying, fix it. Anyway, you can get uncut versions of this show. You can get Talking Wizards. You can get cool stuff. We would very much appreciate it if you would consider supporting us, or if you would consider supporting us by leaving a review of the show on just anything. Bathroom wall, iTunes, I don't care. Just get a Sharpie and write Retro Warriors is great.
Yeah.
On your aunt.
But not with a frowny face, because then people think that you're being sarcastic.
No, obviously put a smiley face.
Correct.
Preferably draw like a little bad dude, and get the whole thing. We do want to thank the following patrons who made this specific episode possible, starting with John Fry.
And Elson Rays.
Brandon Johnson.
Mark Bowler.
Franch Dresser's Bathhouse of Pain.
Classy. Chris Forbes.
Alex.
Retro Gamer Randomness.
Rob Powers.
And Nick Brown.
Are all the people that made this episode possible, and we want to thank them from the absolute very bottom basement level of our hearts for their
and the rest of the heart too,
and the rest of the heart from there up, upward,
not just in the cockles, but the whole thing.
Oh God, I want to thank you from the bottom of my cockles, sir. You have to leave.
The cockles of the heart.
You cannot keep saying that to the staff. We do want to thank them for their patronage. Indeed. It means a lot to us, and you mean a lot to us, listener. wherever you are, in your car.
It's getting weird, Justin.
Or maybe you're like cleaning your house. Don't forget to dust, because here's the thing. You forget to dust, and then you turn your fan on, it blows the dust on your freshly vacuumed carpet. What was the point? You clean top to bottom. You start with ceiling fan, go all the way down to the floor. That's a pro tip. I hope the rest of your house cleaning goes nice. Anyway, thank you for listening. We'll be back next week, and as always, let us cling together.